everyone, this is Neha Tulsyan from Crescent Creation. Welcome to another video on my YouTube channel. Today's video is part of my Pure Innocence card series. And today I have two cards for you featuring the Pure Innocence Champ and Goal Getter stamp sets from My Favorite Things. One of my card is a regular A2 size card and the second one is a Gatefold card that folds into an A2 size card. And I'm going to show you how to create both of them, so let's get started. Here I'm starting with partially stamping the boy image from the Pure Innocence Champ stamp set. I'm using my stamp chamois to clean the part on the stamp that I do not want to stamp. In this case, the boy is holding a trophy and I want him to hold a bunch of balloons. So I cleaned that trophy area using my stamp chamois, which also cleaned a little part of his head and hand that I'm re-inking here. And now I'll go ahead and stamp the image. So you can see his left arm is almost wiped. So I'm gonna go ahead and stamp it again, trying to stamp as close as possible, trying to not ink the trophy but rest of his hands. So here I went as close as possible and I got a little bit of ink where I didn't want to. So I'm using my sand eraser to erase as much of ink as I can, and then using my Copic multiliner, I'll go ahead and sketch the rest of his hand. Once that's done, I'll go ahead and stamp the balloon image from the balloon bundle stamp set. And this time again, I'll go ahead and do some partial stamping, as this bunch of balloon has a lot of strings going in all directions and I want them all together so the boy can hold the balloon bundle. So here I'm stamping the image twice to get a crisp image, making sure I do not ink up the strings. And once done stamping, I'll go ahead and use my Copic multiliner and draw the strings that's coming all together into the hand of the boy. Here I made a mistake with my last string, but I'm going to show you how I fixed it. So here I'm drawing another string as I originally wanted to, and then I'll go ahead and just fussy cut that part of the image where I made mistake, and no one will ever know that I actually made that mistake. So here you can see I just fussy cut that part and that's it. The mistake was fixed. This was easier than me going and stamping the whole image again. Now fussy cutting the rest of the image and I'll then go ahead and color this image. I'll go ahead and put some music for you to enjoy the coloring, and the colors used are listed on the bottom of the screen. I'm done coloring and I'm using my black gel pen to darken those eyes, and it just brings the image back to life. Next, using my white gel pen and adding highlights. Next, I have die-cut this car using white and black cardstock from the Carpool Die-namics from MFT. I'm going to go ahead and white heat emboss the main body of the car here. I wanted to have a white car with shine on it, like usually cars do. So I thought I will go ahead and use my white heat embossing powder and heat emboss the main body of the car. So I covered the die cut with clear embossing ink, and now I'm pouring in white embossing powder on top of it. And then I'll go ahead and heat set the white embossing powder. Once the powder is completely melted, I'll go ahead and immediately pour more embossing powder on top of it while the die cut is still hot. And I'll go ahead and again heat set it using my heat tool. I'll repeat this process 2 more times and I'll end up with a nice white shiny car. So now that it's done, I'll go ahead and assemble rest of the car. I'm using liquid glue from Burley Arts to assemble these tiny pieces. You need some strong glue to glue these pieces onto an embossed die cut. Coloring my headlights using a yellow Copic marker. Here I'm making sure I'm gluing the steering wheel in place by keeping the boy image as a guide. I left my nameplate plain, but you can go ahead and stamp any sentiment on the nameplate of the car. Here I'm almost done assembling the car. All is left is to glue the boy image to it. And this is when I realized that I didn't have to color this boy image completely, as the bottom part of this image is gonna get hidden by the car. And now I'll keep that aside and work on my background. Here I have die cut this road using white cardstock from the On the Road Die-namics. And I'm using Hickory Smoke and Black Soot Distress Oxide inks to ink up the road. I used Hickory Smoke and almost colored the complete die cut with it, and then came in with Black Soot and just colored the edges from both the sides. I'm using my blending brushes here that I got from Amazon to do all the inking. If you're interested in review of these brushes, I have a video that I have linked on the top right of the screen. Once that's done, I'll go ahead and ink up the panel that goes behind the road. This measures 3 inches by 4 inches. And I'm inking the center part of this panel using Fossilized Amber Distress Oxide ink. That's going to create that yellow line that peeks from behind the road. I'm using Modelon Distress Oxide ink and inking both sides of this panel, and that creates the grassy hill on either side of the road. Lastly, to ink up the sky, I have a panel that measures 4 by 5¼ inches, and I'm using Salty Ocean and Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink to ink up the top half of this panel. Next, I'll go ahead and use my distress sprayer and spray some water on the sky and blot it dry using paper towel. Then I'll use my heat gun to dry this panel. Next, I'm smushing Salty Ocean Distress Oxide ink pad to my acrylic block, adding some water to it, and using my fan brush adding some texture to the sky. Here I felt that the Salty Ocean splatters were not dark enough, so I smushed some Blueprint Sketch Distress Oxide ink onto my acrylic block. I'm lightly splattering that onto my sky using the fan brush. Next, I'm using my heat gun to heat set this panel, and now I'll go ahead and start gluing everything together. So I glued the road onto that grass panel, trimmed off the excess road, and here I'm gluing that panel to the sky panel. Next, I'll go ahead and glue the boy holding the balloons to my car. And before I glue anything further, I'll first go ahead and stamp the sentiment Happy Birthday onto my card front. This Happy Birthday sentiment is from the balloon bundle stamp set. I'm gonna go ahead and heat emboss this sentiment in black. So here I'm using my anti-static powder tool to prep the surface, then stamping the sentiment in black ink. I'm using a dye ink here, so I had to go ahead and use my clear ink to stamp this sentiment so that I can heat emboss this sentiment. Pouring the black embossing powder, and then I'll go ahead and heat set it off camera. You do not have to use 2 inks for this, but you can just go ahead and use 1 black pigment ink. I popped my car with boy image with lots of foam squares. Now matting my card front onto a black cardstock that's just a little bit bigger than my card front, and then gluing this to an A2 size note card using some liquid glue. Lastly, for the inside of the card, I stamped the same balloon image using black ink. Then I stamped the sentiment "We are definitely going to celebrate" from the same balloon bundle stamp set. I did a little bit of stamp surgery here to make sure my sentiment fits. Lastly, adding some white highlights onto the card using my white gel pen, and my card will be ready. And that is my first card for you using the MFT Champ stamp set from My Favorite Things. Now let's move on to the next card. I'll start creating the base of this card first. Here I have a 5.5 by 8.5 cardstock. I'm making my first score at 2 1/8 inches at 8.5 inch side. Rotating my cardstock and making the same score again. Folding the cardstock on those score lines, burnishing using my bone folder. And that's how you create a Gatefold A2 size note card. Next, to create the inside scene, I have a cardstock that measures 2 inches by 8.5 inches, and I'm using my Copic markers to color it to create the floor. I'm going to add some music for you to watch the coloring. Once the floor is colored, I'll go ahead and glue that to the inside of my card. I'm using some pattern papers to create the wall for my inside scene. The center pattern paper measures 4 1/8 inches by 3.5 inches. The sides measures 2 1/8 of inches by 3.5 inches. Here I'm gluing a white strip to create the baseboard. Once I'm done gluing all the pieces to the inside of my card, I'll go ahead and score the card once again to make sure that my card folds properly. Now I'll go ahead and glue the same pattern papers to the outside of my card. These here measures 2 1/8 inches by 5.5 inches. And this is how my card base looks once all done. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a band for this card. I have a 2 inch by 9.25 inch cardstock. I'm scoring at 2.5 inches and at 7 inches. Folding on those score lines and burnishing them using my bone folder. And then gluing this using my liquid glue. And my belly band for the card is ready. Next, I have stamped few images from the stamp set MFT Goal Getter and also the stamp set called Festive Old Friends. I stamped these banners from My Day to Celebrate stamp set. And now I'm using my Copic markers to color these images. While creating this card, the scene in my mind was that the grandparents came together to celebrate their grandkid, and you can use this scene for any occasion. So here I'm going to put some music for you to go ahead and enjoy the coloring, and I'll come back see you once I'm done coloring. So here I'm done coloring all my images and I have laid down my scene to see how it all looks. But before gluing anything, I'll first go ahead and stamp the sentiment. Yay, you totally did it from the Goal Getter stamp set. I'm using my Misty and a black ink to stamp the sentiment. And I'm gonna stamp it twice to get a crisp image. Once done stamping the sentiment, I'll go ahead and start gluing my images. While gluing the banners, I started with the center banner first and then glued the rest of the banners beside it. For gluing all the images to the inside of my card, I'm using liquid glue from Barely Arts. You don't want to use any foam tape or dimensional adhesive to glue images to the inside of your card. I really like how these images from different stamp sets work together so well. Adding some shadows beneath all the images using my cool gray markers. I used C3 and C2 here. And the inside of my card is all ready. Now all is left is to decorate the belly band and I will be done. Since there was so much going on in the inside of my card, I wanted to keep the outside simple. So I decided to just decorate the belly band and that will be it. So here I have another pattern paper in the same pattern but different color and I am putting that on my belly band. I glued it using liquid glue and here I'm trimming off the excess. Next, on a black cardstock, I'm stamping the sentiment congratulations from the MFT Champ stamp set. I stamped the sentiment using clear ink as I'm gonna go ahead and white heat emboss the sentiment. I melted the embossing powder using my heat gun off camera. Here I'm using my guillotine trimmer to trim the sentiment into a thin strip and I'm using this trick from Jennifer McQuarrie where you keep an extra cardstock on the trimmer to see where the trimmer will cut, then slide the cardstock that you want to cut beneath it, line it up with the top cardstock and make the cut. This way you know exactly where you're cutting using your trimmer. I always had such a hard time using this trimmer, but this trick from Jennifer McQuarrie is just a game changer. Here I'm using my scissors to cut some fishtails on either side of the sentiment. And I have off camera colored this balloon image from the balloon bundle stamp set to go on the front of my card that I'm gluing on top of the banner using some foam tape. The colors on the balloons are the same colors that I used to color the images for the inside of my card. And here I'm gluing the congratulations sentiment on top of the balloon using some foam tape and liquid glue. And that's it. My belly band for the front of my card is ready. So here is my second card, the Gatefold card featuring the Goal Getter stamp set from My Favorite Things. And I'm so happy with how both these cards turned out. So this was my second and the last video for the month of May for my Pure Innocence card series featuring the Goal Getter and Champ stamp set from My Favorite Things. Click on the left of the screen to watch the first video for the month of May for this series, or click on the right video to watch the Pure Innocence card series playlist. Thank you for visiting. Have a nice day.